Hello, developers. Today, I'm really excited to share something special with you. This project has been in my to-do list for a very long time, and this weekend, I didn't upload any video because I was fully focused on building this feature. But before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how Instagram or Facebook stories work so smoothly? You tap on a profile, and the stories start playing one by one. You can tap to move forward, swipe to switch users, and everything feels so seamless. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of logic managing autoplay, user interactions, and smooth transitions. And that's exactly what we're going to build today. I have created a fully dynamic story viewer using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript powered by Swiper.js. And trust me, this is not a simple image slider. There's a lot more happening here. First, all the slides are dynamic, which means you can add as many stories as you want without modifying the logic. Just update the content, and everything adjusts automatically. Clicking on a user's avatar will open their stories, starting from the first slide. And the best part? The stories play automatically, and we can even set a default duration for each one. Now, what if you want to navigate manually? That's covered too. Clicking on the left or right part of the screen moves between stories. And if you're watching the last story of a user, clicking next will take you to the next user's stories. No awkward stops, just a smooth flow. And here's where things get even more exciting. We have a 3D cube effect when switching between users. This makes the transitions feel much more interactive and visually engaging. But wait, what if you want to pause a story? Just tap anywhere on the screen and it stops. Tap again and it resumes. And if you're someone who prefers swiping, you can simply swipe left or right to switch between users. And the best part? This setup includes all the necessary callbacks for debugging, so you can easily add extra functionalities or modify the behavior however you like. This means whether you want to add analytics, custom animations, or even different transition effects, you have complete control. So in this video, I'll walk you through how this entire system works, from handling autoplay logic to controlling video playback and optimizing performance. By the end, you'll have a fully functional story viewer just like the ones used by social media platforms. So let's dive into the code and start building. But before that, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more UI development tips. Let's get started. All right, developers, let's start by understanding the HTML structure of our Instagram-like story viewer. This will be the foundation of our project, so we need to go through it step by step, ensuring everything is clear. Now, the head section contains some metadata, links to Swiper.js, and our CSS file. Swiper.js is a powerful library that we'll use to create smooth and interactive sliders. But we don't need to focus too much on this part right now. Our main concern is the body, where the entire UI is structured. So at the very top, we have a div with the class stories. This will be our story tray where all the user avatars will appear. Inside this, we have multiple anchor tags, each representing a user. Every user has a profile image inside a story's avatar span, a username inside a story's name span. When we click on any avatar, it will open that user's stories in a pop-up modal. Simple, right? Now below that, we have a body content div with just a heading. This is purely informational and doesn't affect functionality. But here comes the most important part, the modal for displaying stories. This modal is a hidden container that will only appear when we click on an avatar. Inside it, we have a stories slider div that holds our story content, a swiper slider with the class main swiper. This main swiper acts as the outer container, which allows us to switch between users smoothly. Now inside it, we have multiple swiper slide divs where each one represents a different user story collection. And inside each user's slide, we have another nested swiper slider. This one is for displaying that user's individual stories. Let's break this down. Each swiper slide represents one user. Inside it, we have a close button to exit the story view, the user's profile info at the top, including their name, avatar, and the time they uploaded the story. A nested swiper slider that holds all their individual stories. Each individual story is placed inside a swiper slide, and these can be either images or text-based posts. When we click Next, we will move to the next story. And once we reach the last story of a user, clicking Next will take us to the next user automatically. Now, to enhance navigation, we have pagination dots to show the story progress. Next, in previous buttons for manual navigation. And for debugging purposes, we also have a debug section at the end, where we can print logs if needed. Finally, at the bottom, we have our script imports, including Swiper.js and our JavaScript file that will handle all the logic. So, in summary, the story tray at the top shows all available users. Clicking an avatar opens the modal. Inside the modal, we have two Swiper instances, one for switching users and another for switching stories. We can navigate using clicks, swipes, or buttons, making the experience smooth and intuitive. This structure ensures that everything remains dynamic, responsive, and easy to expand. And now that we understand the HTML, let's move on to the CSS to bring this to life. But before that, if you're finding this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe for more UI tips. Let's continue. First, we start with the universal selector. This applies to all elements on the page. I set the padding and margin to 0 to remove default spacing, and I use the box sizing property to make sure the width and height of elements include padding and borders. This prevents unexpected layout shifts. Now for the HTML and body elements, I make sure their position is set to relative and their height is set to 100%. Why? Because I want the main container to take up the full height of the viewport, and setting this ensures the layout expands properly. Next, let's talk about the body. I give it a black background to create a dark theme. I also set the font family to a common sans serif typeface to keep the text looking clean and modern. Moving on to the content inside the body, I use a class that defines the main text. I set the font size to a standard value, apply uppercase transformation, and center align the text. The padding on the top and bottom creates space, making sure the content looks visually balanced. Now, let's focus on the main container for the slider. I ensure it takes up the full width and height of the screen. This makes sure the stories cover the entire viewport, creating an immersive effect. Here's an interesting part. I apply a rule to the pagination bullets of the slider. If there's only one bullet, I force it to be visible. Normally, the slider hides it when there's just one slide, but I override that behavior. Next, I deal with pointer events. By default, I disable all interactions inside the stories container. This prevents unwanted clicks. But when the modal opens, I enable interactions again, allowing users to tap and navigate through the stories. Now let's style the user section. I place the user's name and profile picture at the top left using absolute positioning. To keep it above everything else, I apply a higher stacking order. Inside this section, I align the profile picture and text in a single row using Flexbox. For the user's avatar, I set a fixed size and use a circular shape. The image inside follows the same size and shape, and I use an object fit property to ensure it covers the avatar space without distortion. Now, here's a small but important detail. I add a text shadow to the user's name and the date. This makes the text more readable against bright backgrounds, ensuring better visibility. Let's move on to the slides inside the slider. I set a dark background and apply white text for contrast. The text size is large enough to be readable, and I center everything both horizontally and vertically. To soften the edges of the slides, I add rounded corners. Here's something cool. I use a special effect on each slide. I add an extra layer at the top of the slide with a gradient background. This fades into the content, creating a smooth transition between the slide and the navigation bar. For the images and videos inside each slide, I make sure they take up the full space without breaking the layout. I apply an object fit property to ensure they are displayed properly, whether they are landscape or portrait. Now, let's talk about the story thumbnails. I create a horizontal scrolling section where users can preview different stories. To hide the scroll bar and keep it clean, I apply a property that removes the scroll bar styling. Each story thumbnail has a circular avatar. I use a gradient border effect to make it stand out. But here's the trick. I place a smaller black circle inside the gradient to create a ring effect. This makes the avatars look visually appealing while keeping the focus on the image inside. Below each avatar, I display the user's name. I add some spacing to separate it from the avatar and keep it readable. Now let's focus on the modal that appears when a story is opened. By default, the modal is hidden. I set its visibility to hidden and opacity to 0, making sure it doesn't interfere with the rest of the page. But when the modal is triggered, I use an animation to fade it in smoothly. Here's an interesting animation effect. When the modal opens, it first appears at half its normal size, then grows slightly larger, before settling at its final size. This creates a smooth opening transition that feels natural. Finally, I add a small debug panel at the bottom right corner. This panel displays real-time information about the slider's state. To keep it unobtrusive, I use a semi-transparent background with small text. This CSS is packed with clever tricks to improve both aesthetics and functionality. Before we jump into the actual code, let's first understand what we are working with. This script is heavily dependent on a library called Swiper.js, which is a JavaScript library used to create interactive sliders and carousels. Swiper.js allows us to build a swipeable, touch-enabled interface, making it ideal for mobile-friendly experiences. Now, in this script, we are dealing with two main Swiper instances, one for the main set of stories and another for the inner stories inside each slide. The logic here ensures that when a user interacts with the main slider, the corresponding inner slider is managed properly. Let's start with the basics. First, we are selecting a few key elements from the page. The modal, which is an overlay that appears when the user clicks on a story. All the story buttons, which are links inside the stories section. All close buttons, which are used to close the modal. A debug wrapper, which is just a container used for displaying debugging messages. These elements are stored in variables so that they can be used throughout the script. Now, let's talk about the Swiper.js initialization. The first Swiper instance is created for the main slider, which contains all the stories. This is referred to as the main Swiper. It has the cube effect applied, meaning each slide transitions in a 3D cube-like rotation. The speed of the transition is set to 1 second. The loop is disabled, meaning it does not go back to the first slide when reaching the last one. Touch movements are allowed, meaning the user can manually swipe between stories. The cube effect is configured to have no shadow and no slide shadows, making the effect smoother. Additionally, navigation buttons are set up for moving between stories, and event listeners are attached to handle user interactions. Now, let's focus on the event listeners inside the main Swiper. One of the key events here is when the slide changes. When the user swipes to another story, any previously running timers are cleared. All videos inside the Swiper container are paused to ensure they do not keep playing in the background. The inner Swiper for the new active slide is initialized. After a short delay, any inactive inner swipers are cleaned up to free up memory. Finally, a debug message is displayed, indicating that the user has changed slides. Other important events include when the user touches the screen, all inner swipers pause autoplay. When the user lifts their finger, autoplay resumes for the inner swipers. These behaviors make sure that when the user interacts with the slider, it responds naturally without interfering with autoplay. Next, we have a function for cleaning up inner swipers. This function loops through all stored inner swiper instances and destroys any that are not currently active. Why is this important? Because keeping too many Swiper instances running at once can slow down the page. By destroying unused instances, we ensure the app runs smoothly. Now, let's move on to handling the modal. When a user clicks on a story, the modal opens. At this point, the modal is made visible by adding a class. The main Swiper jumps to the selected story without animation. The inner Swiper for that story is initialized. A debug message logs which story was opened. Similarly, when the close button is clicked, the modal is hidden. All inner swipers are destroyed to clean up resources. A debug message is displayed indicating the modal was closed. Now let's talk about one of the most interesting parts of the script, getting the duration of a slide. Some slides may contain videos, and we want to adjust the duration of each slide based on whether a video is present. If the slide contains a video, we check its duration. If the video duration is longer than 15 seconds, we limit it to 15 seconds. If no video is found, a default duration of 2.5 seconds is used. This ensures that slides with videos remain visible for as long as the video plays, while regular slides move at a fixed speed. Next, let's discuss progress bars. The script updates progress bars dynamically. If a slide is already viewed, its progress bar is set to 100%. If a slide is currently active, its progress bar updates in real time based on the time left. If a slide is not yet viewed, its progress bar remains empty. This creates a smooth visual experience, showing the user how much time remains for each story. There is also a function for pausing all videos. Whenever the slide changes, this function finds all video elements inside the swiper and pauses them. This ensures that only the video in the active slide plays while all others are stopped. Next, we have a function for playing the active video. This function finds the video in the currently active slide. If a video exists, it plays automatically. This makes sure that when the user moves to a story containing a video, it starts playing immediately. Another important function in this script is setting up navigation. If the user is at the last slide, the next button is disabled. If the user is at the first slide, the previous button is disabled. Otherwise, both buttons are enabled. This provides a smooth user experience by preventing navigation errors. Now, let's talk about handling inner swipers. All right, let's go through this function slowly and thoroughly to understand every part of it. This function is called handleInnerSwiper, and its job is to initialize an inner swiper instance for a specific story. Before we dive into the function, let's first understand why we need inner swipers in the first place. Imagine you have a main swiper that holds multiple stories. Each story is a slide inside the main swiper. Now, inside each story, you might have multiple smaller slides. For example, the main swiper controls switching between different users' stories. The inner swiper inside each story allows the user to navigate through that user's individual story slides. This function is responsible for setting up those inner swipers whenever a user opens a story. Step 1. Prevent reinitialization. The function starts by checking if an inner swiper already exists for the given index. If the inner swiper at this index is already created, the function immediately returns and does nothing. This is done to prevent recreating the same swiper multiple times, which can cause performance issues. Step 2. Select the inner swiper container. The function then selects the swiper container inside the currently active story. It looks for all elements with the class name .InnerSwiper and selects the one that matches the given index. If it doesn't find the inner swiper container for this index, the function simply returns, meaning it stops executing. At this point, if we have reached this part of the function, it means the swiper hasn't been created before. The corresponding inner swiper container exists on the page. Step 3. Select navigation buttons. Now, the function selects the previous and next buttons inside the inner swiper. It looks for a next button inside the inner swiper container using the class .SwiperInnerNext. It also looks for a previous button using the class .SwiperInnerPrev. These buttons will allow the user to manually navigate within the inner swiper. Step 4. Create the inner swiper. Now comes the most important part, creating the swiper instance. At this stage, the function initializes a new swiper instance inside the selected story. Let's go through the configuration one by one. Direction. The swiper moves horizontally between slides, meaning users will swipe left and right. Loop. The loop is set to false, meaning when the user reaches the last slide, the swiper won't restart. Effect. The effect is set to fade, which means slides fade in and out instead of sliding. Touch movement. Allow touch move is set to false, which means users cannot manually swipe between slides. This ensures that the slides change automatically. Step 5. Set up autoplay. Now, the function configures the autoplay behavior. The delay for autoplay is determined using another function called getSlideDuration. This function checks if the slide contains a video and adjusts the duration accordingly. If a video is present, the slide remains active for the duration of the video. Otherwise, it defaults to 2.5 seconds. Disable an interaction is set to false, which means that if the user interacts with the swiper, autoplay does not stop. Pause and must enter is set to false, which means hovering over the slide does not pause autoplay. This ensures that the slides automatically move without interruption. Step 6. Configure pagination. Pagination refers to those small dots at the bottom of the swiper that indicate which slide is currently active. The function selects the pagination container inside the inner swiper. The clickable option is set to true, meaning users can click on the dots to navigate. The render bullet function customizes each bullet. It wraps each bullet in a progress bar, which visually fills up based on time. This makes the experience feel similar to Instagram or WhatsApp stories, where the small progress bars indicate how long each slide lasts. Step 7. Set up navigation. Next, the function configures the next and previous buttons. These buttons are assigned to the navigation object, so they will work with Swiper.js. Step 8. Event listeners. Now, the function sets up various event listeners for different swiper actions. Let's go through each event slowly and carefully. Event 1. Swiper initialization. When the swiper is initialized, the function set navigation is called. This ensures that the navigation buttons next and previous are properly enabled or disabled based on the swiper's position. Event 2. Autoplay progress update. The function update progress bars is used to update the progress indicators in real time. Event 3. Slide change transition start. This event fires before the slide transition starts. First, a debug message logs the current slide number. Then, any existing timers are cleared to prevent conflicting transitions. Next, all videos inside the swiper are paused to ensure only one video plays at a time. The script then calculates how long the current slide should be displayed using getSlideDuration. If the new delay is greater than 0, autoplay continues. If the new delay is 0, autoplay is stopped. Event 4. Slide change transition end. This event fires after the slide transition finishes. If the new slide contains a video, it starts playing. Event 5. When the last slide is reached. This is a very important part of the script. If the user reaches the last slide of the inner swiper, the function checks if this inner swiper belongs to the currently active main swiper slide. If it is also the last main swiper slide, a final debug message is logged. After a short delay, autoplay stops and the modal closes. Otherwise, the script waits for a moment before moving to the next story. This ensures a smooth, hands-free experience where the stories automatically transition from one user to another. Event 6. When any slide changes. The function set navigation is called again to update the navigation buttons. Step 9. Store the inner swiper. At the very end, the function stores the swiper instance inside the inner swiper's object. This prevents duplicate swipers from being created. The update progress bars function is also called to refresh the progress indicators. Finally, the script has a function for displaying debug messages. This is mainly used for development purposes to track user actions and events happening inside the swiper instance. Okay, this function does a lot of things, but the core logic is simple. It first checks if the swiper already exists. If yes, it stops. It finds the corresponding swiper container for the given story. It sets up autoplay, navigation, pagination, and effects. It listens for important events like slide changes and autoplay updates. It ensures that videos play and pause correctly. It manages transitions between different users' stories. This function makes sure that the inner swiper inside each story works smoothly and efficiently. And that's how we set up a smooth, fully automated inner swiper for stories. With this setup, we ensure that slides transition seamlessly, autoplay is perfectly timed, and videos play only when needed. Plus, we've handled navigation, progress bars, and automatic story progression just like Instagram or WhatsApp. Pretty cool, right? Now, if you found this explanation helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dive tutorials on CSS, JavaScript, and UI development. Also, check out the description below. I've added all the resources, including the Swiper.js documentation, the image and avatar I'm using, and more useful links to help you implement this easily. See you in the next video.